Good morning. Our homily comes from St. Mary's in Warner Beach this morning and is based on John chapter 21, verses 1 to 19, about the God who restores us. We see in today's Gospel passage from John 21, in which Jesus restored Peter. We live in a throwaway culture. The Environmental Department of South Africa has reported that in 2021, South Africa generated about 108 million tons of garbage, 90% which is going to landfills. That despite all the current recycling efforts, only 10% of garbage is being recycled. When things are used or broken, we tend to throw them away. Unfortunately, this is not only the case with impersonal things like cars and clothes, furniture and cell phones, but also personal things like marriages, friendships and beliefs, and even worse, people. Our world is full of people who feel like they have been thrown away, like flotsam and jetsam. The good news is that although we are a throwaway culture, God is not a throwaway God. God is a restoring God. My favorite website is Google for looking up stuff that I don't know. Listen to how Google defines the verb restore. To bring back into existence or use. To bring back to a former, original, or normal condition. To bring back to a state of health, soundness, or vigor. To put back to a former place or to a former position. To restore means to bring back to the way it's supposed to be. Because of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God does these things for us. God restores us as he restored Peter. In John 21, we see that some of the disciples were together again. Jesus had appeared to them twice. They had seen his scars. Even Thomas was a believer now. And yet Peter was still plagued with guilt about what he had done and denying Jesus 3 times in his darkest hour. As far as his standing with Jesus went, Peter considered himself a failure. Peter had done what many of us do when we feel guilty or like a failure. He returned to what he knew. He went fishing. "I'm going fishing," he told his fellow disciples, several of whom joined him. They fished all night long and caught absolutely nothing. That's when Jesus showed up. At dawn, the disciples dimly saw someone standing on the shore. This person called out and asked them if they had caught anything, to which the disciples answered bluntly, "No." Then Jesus tells them, "Cast your net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." Peter and the other disciples were seasoned fishermen. After being out fishing all night, I imagine the last thing they wanted was some helpful suggestions. Think of a time in your life when you were doing something that you've been doing for a long time, and someone comes out of nowhere to tell you how to do it better. What was your initial reaction? And yet, the disciples didn't respond that way. Instead, they did what Jesus told them to do. They cast the net off to the right side of their boat and caught so many fish they were unable to haul it in. After catching a grand total of 0 fish all night, the disciples had caught 153 fish in a matter of minutes. It was at this point that John recognized that the man calling out to them from the shore was none other than the risen Christ. Sometimes in our lives, we go through seasons in which we are given everything we have, in which we give everything we have to something and see very little or no results. And then God intervenes, and you can hardly keep up with all the ways he blesses you. Jesus asked Peter and the others to bring some of the fish they had caught, and simply said, "Come and have breakfast." Jesus knew that after being out fishing all night, the disciples were probably very hungry, so he made breakfast for them. This shows the tender concern Jesus had for his disciples, a tender concern he has for all of us. The disciples then gathered around the charcoal fire and ate the breakfast Jesus had prepared for them. Then Jesus restored Peter. After they ate, Jesus, in front of the other disciples, directly addressed the issue that had been weighing Peter down. Peter's guilt about having denied him 3 times. Peter was feeling down and out. Eric Clapton covered this in his Grammy-winning 1992 Unplugged album as he sang, and I won't sing it, I'll read it to you. Nobody knows when you are down and out. In your pocket, not 1 penny. And as for friends, you don't have any. When you finally get back up on your feet again, everybody wants to be your old, long-lost friend. Said it's mighty strange, without a doubt. Nobody knows when you're down and out. The good news of the gospel is that even if nobody knows when you are down and out, God does. In fact, God knows you especially when you are down and out. When Peter was down and out, Jesus met him right there and restored him. Moreover, Jesus was intentionally compassionate and specific about how he restored Peter. Jesus restored Peter as he sat in front of a charcoal fire. This is significant because the night in which Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, he had done so while warming himself in front of a charcoal fire. By intentionally restoring him in front of a charcoal fire, Jesus gave Peter a tangible sign of his grace. Jesus addressed Peter as Simon, Peter's original name. Similarly, when Simon Peter correctly identifies Jesus as the Son of God at Caesarea and Philippi, Jesus responded, "Blessed are you, Simon. I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Jesus knew that Peter, having denied him 3 times, felt like anything but a rock, and certainly felt that the gates of hell had prevailed against him. Rather than the other way around, he did not feel like a rock. And so Jesus met Peter right there and addressed him as Simon. Then Jesus asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Jesus asked Peter this question 3 times, the same number of times Peter had denied him. He gave Peter 3 chances to proclaim his love for the one whom he had denied. God is not just a God of second chances. God gave Peter multiple chances, and he does the same for you and me. Even though Peter had denied Jesus, Jesus would not deny Peter. God is always faithful to us, even when we're unfaithful to him. In his second letter to Timothy, Peter writes, "If we are faithless, God remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself." Not only does Jesus give Peter 3 opportunities to proclaim his love for him, but he also gives him 3 charges. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. In other words, Peter, care for my followers. Jesus reinstates Peter as a servant in his church. God is not a throwaway God. God is a restoring God. In the parable of the prodigal son that we read a couple of weeks ago, Jesus emphasizes that God is a restoring God as he describes how the rebellious son is completely restored by his father. When the rebellious son finally returns home after squandering his inheritance on his lust and selfishness, the father not only throws a welcome home party, but he also gives the son 3 things. A robe that he was the restored guest of honor, a ring signifying his restored authority, and sandals signifying his restored position as his son. The gracious father gave his son these 3 things in the presence of his family and friends. Jesus graciously gave Peter full restoration as well in the presence of his disciples. Jesus graciously, tenderly, and fully restored Peter. He restored him in front of a charcoal fire like the one by which he sat when he denied him. He addressed him as Simon, knowing he felt like anything but a rock. He gave him 3 opportunities to proclaim his love for him. He charged him 3 times to care for his sheep. In short, Jesus gave Peter a brand new start. And this restored Peter, only weeks later, preached a sermon on Pentecost, to which 3,000 people responded by putting their faith in the one who restores us, Jesus Christ. This restored Peter preached the gospel to many people throughout the Roman Empire and endured much persecution over the course of this apostolic ministry. This restored Peter eventually was martyred during the reign of the notorious Roman Emperor Nero, crucified upside down because he did not consider himself worthy to die the same way as the one who had restored him. Peter, who had been called by Jesus to be the rock, only to deny him 3 times in his darkest hour, was fully restored by Jesus. And God did many amazing things in, through, and in spite of the restored Simon Peter. Perhaps today you, like Peter, are, at the beginning of today's gospel passage, are weighed down by guilt or feel like a failure. Or if you feel like you've been thrown away like so many other things in our culture. Or maybe you've been badly hurt and feel written off. God's promise to us is that he will make all things new. Not only a new earth, but a new you. That journey begins when we believe the good news about Jesus and turn to follow him. That good news includes the hope of restoration, not only in eternity, but now. You can experience healing in your soul now. We have good reason to be hopeful. God is going to do everything he has promised. And that is the good news of Jesus Christ. Amen.